So hello everyone, and thank you for tuning into this webinar on biodesign. My name is Ditte Ravn, and I'm the community manager here at the Index Project. So today we are joined by people from all over the world. I'm sitting here in Copenhagen, but I know that people from the fashion industry here. There's biodesign connoisseurs, there's young designers. So if you'd like to share with us where you're tuning in from, or what brought you here, what's your background, please share that in the chat. It would be really interesting for us to know. And speaking of the chat, I just have some technical stuff. So the thing is that when we will ask you later on to ask questions for Natsai, you will leave those questions in the Q&A down below. And if you have anything you want to share, for example, where you're tuning in from, you can do that in the chat. Also, as you may have noticed, we are recording this webinar, so we can upload it later for the people who couldn't attend to watch. And speaking of what we do here, so I will talk a little bit about the Index Project. Some of you already may know us, some of you don't. The Index Project is a non-profit based here in Copenhagen, which focus on design to improve life. It's our motto, and it kind of encompasses everything we do. So we have the Index Award, which has been handed out since 2005, every second year, where we award the best solutions for design to improve life. We also have global education efforts on design methods, and we have an investment fund. So we invest in the Index Award pool of nominees to make the impact go even further. And Index has existed for 18 years, and that's many years where we've met all kinds of designers, all kinds of people from all over who have the common goal of design to improve life. And we always kind of center around the Index Award, but now we want to do even more for our community. So this webinar is just the beginning, actually. We'll do more webinars with our partner, IDA, the Danish Society of Engineers. We're also looking forward to hosting physical events when we're able to do that again. And we also have some other things coming up. In June, we'll be launching our new podcast, Can Design Save Us?, where we'll discuss everything design. We have an episode coming up on colonizing Mars. We have on designing for virtual togetherness. And also in June, we'll be launching a new tools platform. And in short, this platform will be a go-to page for information, inspiration, and tangible tools on creating an impact business. So if you guys want to stay updated on this stuff, I'll leave some links in the chat by the end of the webinar where you can keep yourself updated. And of course, one of the reasons why we're here today is also because we're launching a new trend report. And to speak more on that, I'll mute my mic and I'll give it over to our CEO of the Index Project, Liza Chong.
Hi, thanks for the intro, Ditte. Hello, everyone. Great to have so many of you joining us for this virtual conversation this afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you're Zooming from. We're delighted to launch our trend report. So this is the first edition. We've been gathering themes that we've seen come through Index Awards most recently. They're themes like habitation on Mars, tech-enabled sleep assistance, solutions addressing Me Too, and debunking fake news. There's a multitude that we've discovered, combed through, and we're happy to share with you what we found. While trends can oftentimes point to fictions yet to be realized, the background of our publication is rooted in the thoughtfully tested designs that have the potential to be truly impactful when fully implemented and scaled. We're on the search for things that are immature, but on the cusp of changing human behaviors for the better, from a moral, ecological, societal, and economical standpoint. We're grounded in the tested and inspired by the moonshots. But more than anything, we're driven by practical solutions based on real needs for impact. As we dive into design trends of today, how will they shape the world of tomorrow? Today, you'll leave with a preview of the report, snippets that give you a flavor of what we've seen. They're the A sides, B sides, which give us hope. So if you're hungry for more, the full report is available for download. Please share if you like what you see. Before we get started on our conversation, I'd like to warmly welcome today's guest, the fabulous Natsai Chieza, designer and founder of Faber Futures, an R&D studio that creates biologically inspired materials, who will enlighten and enchant us with her perspectives on designing with biology. Hi, Natsai.
Hi, Lisa. It's such a pleasure to be able to sort of be here with you and with everyone who's joined today. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. It's great to have you here with us. Yes, we'd love to have you in real life soon, but we'll make do with Zoom. But anyway, let's get right into the topic, biodesign. So for those of you that are new to this theme and unfamiliar, can you tell us what is biodesign?
Gosh, I really, it's a great question. We're trying to figure it out. And I guess what I mean by that is that it's such a nascent emerging field, right? And I'm always quite reluctant to give definitions to things that are in emergence, things that are still open-ended for others to participate in. But broadly speaking, I think that the way that I see it is that it sits on a continuum of how we relate design practices with nature more broadly. And so the working definition that I have is that it's really the design with, of, and from biology. And so if we think about the design with biology, the design with living systems, one of the most beautiful examples that comes to me is Thomas Libertini's vase, honeycomb vase that he designs with a swarm of bees. He trains these bees to build their hive around a scaffold that he's built. And it's this really poetic sense of co-creation with this living system. And I think the bees as a living system is more than metaphor. It's an amazing thing to really understand. And if you think about this, we've been finding strategies to design with living systems, for as long as we've lived on this planet. But this elevated sense that we do that today is tied to the sort of the cultural and ecological crises, I think, that we're facing. And so this new relationship with nature that we're trying to develop, or other relationship or different relationship. I think we see lots of designers and artists who are starting to experiment with modes of making with life. I said the design of biology, and this is really the technological realm, I think, of biodesign when it's augmented with emerging technologies like synthetic biology. Synthetic biology is a biotechnology. It's an emerging discipline of science and now into industry that seeks to design living systems through DNA synthesis so that they have capabilities that they don't normally have in nature. And we've been doing this to develop pharmaceuticals and therapeutics. We've been doing this to develop and when I say we've been doing this, I mean historically we've been doing this to develop chemicals and compounds, fragrances. But now something really interesting is happening. We are seeing the material potential of these technologies. We're seeing their potential as ways to produce protein, which changes effectively where our foodstuffs come from. And so the consumer-facing synthetic biology, I think, will be very different in the future than what you and I might not perceive when we, take some antibiotics in that sense. And then designing from biology, I think, again, lives in this historic sense. We've been designing from biology since we walked this planet, but I think that now it is being augmented as well as with cultural practices that recognize the ecological crisis, is being augmented with emerging technologies too. So hybridized material systems, I think, is where this lives. But as I said, I think that it is an open discipline. I do not think that it is just about materiality. I think, for me at least, biodesign is a state of mind. It's knowing that there is no design without consequence, and that if anything, the COVID-19 crisis has taught us is how intrinsically interconnected we are with each other, with our economic systems, and with our ecologies. So for me, this creates a fundamental shift to completely reframe design as a whole.
Amazing. I mean, one of the applications when we talk about augmentation of biodesign and how we're connected, you and I, is that you're a winner of Index Award 2019 with Project Seeley Color, and I guess this is a great example of biodesign. Could you tell us how did you come up with this, and what brought you to discover Project Seeley Color? What's the story?
Gosh, it's a story that's much easier to tell with time. I'm glad you're not asking me 5 years ago, because I think it would not quite make sense yet. But maybe I start with my background. I'm a designer. I studied architecture at the University of Edinburgh, and was fascinated by scale and the social realm, and how materiality feeds into processes of construction. And so I did not do my part two. Instead, I finished part one and went to Central St. Martin's to study material futures. And that's where I really developed a material vocabulary of my own, but that was intrinsically linked to technology and craft. That's what the course sort of asks you to do. What are materials in the context of craft, in the context of emerging technologies? And that's really where I discovered a lot of the emerging artists who were working in bioart and their work, and you know, the field as an academic field of synthetic biology was taking a hold. And I remember kind of reading the definition of synthetic biology, the textbook definition, which I won't try to memorize now or recall now. But there was this real profound sense that I had that, well, if we're talking about designing with living systems, designing living systems, then that completely changes how we might think of designing at a micro and therefore macro scale, our material world. So when I graduated, I sent an email perhaps to a couple of scientists who were, I literally Googled synthetic biology scientists London because that's where I live. And I got in touch with Professor John Ward at University College London. And to be fair, he was the only scientist who responded to me. And the ask was very simple. It was, you know, to what extent might I just hang around a bit and see what it is that you do, because I have a sneaky suspicion that it's going to change our, you know, entirely change our design industry. And he was like, yeah, sure, come and here's a bench, here's a Petri dish, put your hands on it, come back in a few days, see what happens. And that was really the beginning of our collaboration. We started to work together with an organism called Streptomyces sedicolor. It's a pigment-producing soil microbe. And again, John sort of said, here you go, see what you can do with it. At the time, he said, you're an artist, so see what you can do with it. And I was like, I'm a designer, completely different praxis, perhaps, as to how I'm going to approach this. But very little time passed before I started to grow this organism and understood what it meant to take care of it, and then made that leap of faith that as a designer, I could develop design-driven processes to work with it in some capacity. And I think fresh out of material futures, I thought, okay, textiles, let's see if there's an interface there somehow. And so I started to experiment with bridging the textile world with the biological world in this way over a period of about 10 years. And just spent a lot of time telling people about it at conferences, through exhibitions, a few commissions to push, you know, the work, not just from a material point of view, but from a conceptual point of view. Where do microbes come from? Why does that matter? Actually, it turns out it really matters that we have a connection to these material systems beyond the laboratory-based, this microbe produces pigment, but to start to understand its association and relationship to soil health, since that's where it comes from, and provenances. But anyway, Project Seeley Color sort of evolved over the years, and as we developed these material strategies and design strategies to dye textiles with the organism, we were able to see that it had benefits beyond sort of opening up the design discipline. We were using up to 500 times less water when we were dyeing these textiles. The finish was completely color fast. And this was striking because if there are any textile designers on the call, they'll realize that, color fast without any chemical inputs on our part, that's kind of a miracle. And for a natural dye to be color fast without any chemical inputs, that's really profound. So we were saving water. It was a color fast, chemical free dye. The next question, and then I think something that's ongoing as a challenge for us, is how do you take this system and replace our present systems? And I think that there are many approaches to this. And I think those approaches have different consequences as to how effective and impactful the shift can become. I think that most companies right now that are working towards scaling biofabrication, biodesign as a mechanism of production are more concerned with making sure that they can create that dye compound, enough of it, to dye thousands and thousands and thousands of meters of textiles a day. And that's incredibly important. But I think that what my work has taught me is that there are processes that are built into the very mechanisms of how this beautiful organism grows on textiles that show us that other production methods are possible and feasible too.
Yeah, so I mean, we're currently experiencing a global pandemic that's affecting businesses all across the sectors in really devastating ways, and particularly the fashion industry. So it's really interesting that you're talking about the opportunities and the potential. How and why do you think biodesign in this context can be a change maker for the fashion industry?
I think that's such an important question. I think what is so clear to me with this crisis is the supply chains that we've developed, and how, particularly in the fashion industry, they were designed always to find the cheapest place to make that component and that component and that component. A completely distributed, well, actually not distributed, or fragmented, I would say, supply chain that, didn't take care in its conception to have equity built into it, for example. And not just equity for humans, but equity for ecological systems in how we produce and manufacture. With biodesign, the opportunity is that we have fermentation as a technology here. And if you think about what fermentation did for humankind over thousands of years, it meant that all cultures across the world probably have some kind of fermentation process to convert milk into soured milk. With fermentation, and particularly Project Seeley Color, when we think of the distribution of that supply chain, there are ways in which we can actually have systems of production that happen locally rather than sort of relying on distant sources of materialities. And so for me, that's one of the biggest opportunities, is to think about how local distributed production completely changes resource availability and the distribution of those goods to the people who need them.
Yeah, I guess that's in the context of every sector, thinking about localizing production and bringing that much more closer to home, so to speak. Natsai, I might have to ask you to keep the answers a little bit shorter so we can squeeze in some more questions.
Sure, of course.
Just a reminder to our participants who've tuned in here, if you've got any questions for Natsai, please drop them in the Q&A and we'll try and get to as many questions as we possibly can. Okay, I'm going to fire on to the next question. So we've talked about the opportunities, the potential, specifically with the focus on supply chains within the fashion industry. There must be some risks. There's got to be some risks involved here, and my concern, or potentially sort of things that I think about, is the democratizing of biotech. So suddenly everyone has information about how you can design using biology, and here we are right in the middle of a global pandemic where COVID-19 really marks the return of a familiar enemy. So throughout history, we've had more human beings being killed by viruses, bacteria, parasites that cause disease. What's your view on democratizing of biotech and the risks attached to it?
I think that the risks that are attached to this field are many. And it needs an engaged public. We need to create space for people to determine what kind of biological futures they would like to inhabit. And part of that, I think, is creating institutional frameworks and regulatory frameworks that include people in the design of these systems. One of the difficulties with that is the way in which these technologies are so siloed, the way in which these disciplines are so siloed. You have science on one side, humanities on the other. And a lot of the work that we do at Faber Futures is to try to find ways in which we can bridge disciplines to have more thoughtful conversations about how these technologies are developed in the very first place. But I do think that it's going to be, really important at a very early age in our education system for the next generation of not just designers but scientists to feel very comfortable with talking across disciplines, so that the knowledge that we create together about what a good intervention is versus what an intervention that is to the detriment of other people, perhaps not here but far away, that requires dialogue. And for those dialogues to happen, they almost need to be institutionalized in many respects. So there's no single way of mitigating risks in this field, but I think for us, dialogue, communication, and understanding is such an important way to at least start asking the right questions about where those risks lie.
No, I mean, that's a very fair point. I mean, we all need to be part of that conversation. And I guess with every opportunity, there are always going to be the things that challenge and worry us. One question I have, within the sector that you've been working with, and I guess that's kind of across different multiple disciplines, you and your peers are really disrupting the status quo. So in your view, what do you think are the greatest barriers that you face within the industry?
Disrupting the status quo is really difficult because you're challenging what people have spent lifetimes building, and that can be hard. I recognize that. If I look at it from a Project CD Color point of view, the conversations that we have with brands tend to start off really, really well until we start to talk about, you can't just change the material input. You actually have to change the infrastructure around it and the culture around it too. And that can be difficult because that feels like an impossible task. And it feels like an impossible task to achieve before next fashion week. So one of the difficulties, I think, is building long-term relationships of collaboration with people who understand that there's a long game, and we can start with a material dialogue, but that commitment needs to go beyond the season. That I think is anyone's challenge when you're dealing with trying to change a system, is when short-termism rules. That creates a lot of barriers for us.
I guess that also comes back to your definition, or the attempt of a definition at the start. What is biodesign? And you quite honestly said it's a mindset. So it's just as much having an open mind for the opportunities, and also sort of, yeah, the fight. What it is you're up against. I have another question here, which is primarily directed towards a lot of the number of emerging designers that we have in our audience today. So the soon-to-be graduate designers, and the potential challenges as a designer to get their foot into the job market in a time of uncertainty. It's going to be tough. Do you have advice or wisdom for our listeners here as they are going to be unleashed into the unknown?
I really feel for graduates right now. I think that it's always uncertain when you're graduating, and now it's exacerbated by this crisis. I graduated from architecture in 2009, a year after the crash, and I can see how that has had, profound consequence on the path that I've taken. But having said that, I think because I had such little faith in the availability of opportunities at the time, I had a mindset from the start. I think that if what I want to do doesn't exist, I actually have to create it. What I do feel right now is that the space, the permission to create something new is really palpable in a way that it just wasn't, I think, when we crashed out. So, bravery and conviction about how you want to spend your time, your knowledge, your passion, and allow process to lead that, and the perseverance I think that's required in uncertain times is I guess the best advice I can give. If you want something and you don't see it, build it, and build a community around you to reinforce that what will be a long-term life journey in some regards.
Well, I mean, let's dial it back to the subject of biodesigned again. I mean, that's brilliant wisdom, and I guess that's applicable for every graduate. So us as consumers, I mean, here we are, we're talking about trying to change the status quo, but as consumers, what could we be doing in order to apply pressure on corporations to create products that aren't extractive, but regenerative, and sourced naturally, like bacteria, for instance? Mm-hmm. What could we do?
I'm reminded, a wise person said, never reward bad behavior, when thinking of a 3-year-old having a tantrum. And I think it's a little bit like that. We have to decide what we support and what we don't. And in our economic system, we can actually use tools of that economic system to do that. And so if there are expectations, I think, as consumers that we have of how a brand should behave, and how it intends, and I'm very careful about this, what are the brand's intentions for what they want to do in the next 10 years? Because nobody expects brands that have been living la vida loca today to suddenly change and offer the shift. But I think there's an expectation now that brands don't just signal, but show us how they're trying and what that long-term commitment is, and people will vote with their money in that regard. That's the power, I think, that every individual has. If a brand isn't demonstrating that for you, then don't reward it.
So in a way, there's an authenticity that consumers can seek and demand, in a way. So I mean, if you have a CSR strategy or an environmental kind of impact report that you're publishing on an annual basis, you really have to so-called deliver the goods and really deliver it authentically. I think consumers are wise and savvy enough to want to expect more from their brands and their corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the next question. I mean, Faber Futures, it's your R&D studio. We'd love to hear more about it. What's next for Faber Futures?
That's a hard question to answer. Under lockdown, I could tell you what was supposed to happen, but I think that this time has been really great for us to reflect on what's important moving forwards, and where we want to have the most impact. We've just launched a project in collaboration with Ginkgo Bioworks, Ferment.tv, and I think it's a little bit of manifesto seeking that we're doing with the project. It's a live broadcast series that opens up the world of synthetic biology, with a view to diversify the notion of what biological futures are and who they include. So we have artists, we have designers, we have synthetic biologists, we have all manner of people who are actively engaging with this notion of the future of humans and the future of nature. And what we're really trying to do with the project, at least for myself selfishly, is to find who the people are and the pathways to start to instigate these impactful interventions. And so when I look at Project Seeley Color as a research project that has the potential to actually be in somebody's hands as the alternative to the system that's broken, thinking through a project like Ferment with some of these voices helps us map what kind of offer Project Seeley Color becomes, that it actually delivers on its promise of not just sustainable material artifacts, but also on the equitable side with humans too.
So a little bit coming back to your point of surrounding yourself with the institutions and sort of almost building an army to kind of raise and elevate the message to a more mainstream. We have a question. Who do you consider front runners in the fashion industry in regards to changing to a sustainable mindset? So who, in your view, is really, really standing out?
I think that, this long-term view is very interesting to me. I think when you do look at brands like Stella McCartney, who decided a long time ago to position themselves as a brand that really cared about the rights of animals, and now a brand that is systematically dealing with the link between fashion and soil health. I think that we have in Stella McCartney an example of long-term research and development and building of that army of suppliers, of R&D partners to develop new materials, alternative materials, and not necessarily saying, look, we did it, but look, we are doing it. We have been trying, and now I think everyone is sort of catching up and starting to figure out what their trying looks like. There are others, but I'm just struck at how for such a long time the brand has evolved and expanded upon what an ethics in a brand looks like.
I mean, one thing that I have to ask you, Natsai, being trained as an architect, a designer, and now becoming a business owner, I mean, how is it with that transition and sort of moving in that direction, and of course standing in front of a kind of a legacy industry and trying to disrupt that? How is it to be you?
It's hard. I think I'm allowed to say that.
I didn't answer. I didn't offer any easy questions this time.
No. I think I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit in the sense that I see connections, and I see how those connections can be leverage to create something new, to create something better, perhaps. So I feel quite comfortable, actually, as somebody transitioning from design as being, you know, the main toolkit, to starting to consider strategy, relationship building, and managing a team, even, and thinking about what that makeup is relative to the goals that we have. That's really something that, you know, my training didn't necessarily prepare me for. But I think that because we have this poetic, artistic, you know, we are designers at the end of the day, it isn't so difficult to confront established modes of doing. It's not difficult to confront industry, because in some ways we're outsider to that. So I think it's an interesting evolution, certainly for myself. But I'm excited in growing into that space. I miss the design bit, though. I have to say, I miss designing and having time and space to just focus on that. But I have a brilliant team, so we make it work.
You make it work, and you're a team all based in London.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although everyone feels very far away right now.
Well, yeah, I know. We all do.
Yeah.
Sharing that with you.
Mm.
Okay, well, Natsai, I have to thank you for your time and for joining us today. I mean, I think actually maybe just a kind of a sidebar note. So I met you exactly a year ago, when you came to Copenhagen. You were invited for a talk here. So it feels quite surreal that we relude a year later. I had the great pleasure of course, meeting you in person, and of course, telling you that you were the winner of Index Award in person. I think it was the first time in our history that an Index Award winner was told in person. So, I mean, it was a great privilege to be able to meet you. You inspired me from the day I met you, and the work that you do consistently inspires me. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to hand over to Dida now, who's going to just wrap up. Thanks,
Yes.
Natsai.
Thank you very much, Natsai, and Lisa, of course, also. Yes, this was our webinar. That's all we had for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. We had people, I can reveal, from UK, Germany, Turkey, Copenhagen, the US. So really great for all of you to join in. I know you're in different time zones and such. So right now in the chat, I've shared some links. First of all, I shared a link for the free preview and for the trend report. And if you want to purchase it, that's also where you'll be able to do that. I've also shared a link for a survey, because we, as I said earlier, we really want to do more webinars like these. And we just want to know if you have any feedback, if there was anything you liked, you didn't like. So you can click that survey if you want to help us. Takes 2 minutes, very easy, much gratitude. And we also have a link to our Index community group. So if you want to keep yourself updated on, I mentioned the podcast, the tools platform, and other invitations for our events, that is also where you can find that. Also, right now we have free design thinking support sessions. So if your company is in need of adapting to these new challenges we're having right now, or need some guidance, you can get these support sessions. So you can check that out in the link as well. And if you're just want to leave the computer and say that was it for today, I'll also send a link out tomorrow with all these links, so you can do it tomorrow. This is of course only if you registered for this event. If you joined by the public link, you will have to save this little chat so you can access these links. But that's all we had for today. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. We'll be looking forward to doing way more of these. I can tell you that in August, we'll be doing one with Ida on post-climate change. So stay tuned for that. And thank you all so much for joining today.